those wild card spots. And so I think the powerhouses in the AFC are still the Texans, Chiefs, Patriots, Chargers. I just don't think the Steelers are one of them.
No, the point you made about the Steelers defense is really what I took away, because you saw last year they went in, had a home game versus Jacksonville, and the defense couldn't stop Jacksonville. They made Jacksonville look like some version of this year's Chiefs or Rams at that point. So the defense has always been the concern. They sort of fell apart, self-destructed in the second half. As a team, they had a bunch of penalties, that whole charade and the last field goal try for the Chargers. Steelers are jumping off sides multiple times. I know what they're trying to do at that point, but we know the Chargers kicking issues. I don't know why you want to just keep jumping off sides at that point, making it an easier and easier kick and giving him more tries. So there's a lot of concern there. Offensively, yeah, they can always move the football up and down the field, but you do start to have concerns about Connor. Is the workload of this year catching up? He seems to be getting nicked up quite a bit here in the last 3 or 4 games. If you look at his stat sheet, he went through a stretch there where he just wasn't all that impressive, and they weren't really running the football that much. So really now the Steelers, after they've dropped 2 in a row, the Ravens have won 3 in a row. So the Steelers have sort of fallen back to the pack here. It looked like for a while they were going to run off and hide in this division when they were 7-2-1, and the Ravens were sitting there before their win streak. So now it's 7-4-1, 7-5 for the Ravens. The Ravens have a tough game this week going to Kansas City, but then they get games versus Tampa. They have to go out to play the Chargers. That'll be a tough game. And then the Browns. Steelers get the Saints and Patriots. So this division's definitely not yet over. Where 2 weeks ago it looked like the Steelers up 3 games were going to run off and hide. Now there's some interest in this division because this is also going to affect that playoff seeding. Even if the Steelers win, there's a chance they could have to play a team like Baltimore at home and then have to go play at New England and potentially at the Chiefs. Eric, there's no way they're getting through all those with this team and this defense. There's no way they're going to beat 3 teams that good in a row. I just don't see it at this point.
No, they're in big trouble. And Justin, let's react real quickly to something that I was thinking from this past week, and it's this. Can you believe how many teams that were in the hunt for a playoff berth, whether it be in the wild card or in the division? Can you believe how many of them are just screwing up their seasons? Check this out. I mean, and I know you know this, but just kind of for the listeners, if you didn't follow Week 13 action in the NFL, here's some of the losses that took place that really either took teams completely out of it now for the season or significantly impacted their chances at a wild card. The Falcons, the Bengals, the Lions, the Packers, the Panthers, the Colts, and the Vikings all lost. And of course the Steelers too, which we just talked about. But those teams all lost this past weekend. Some of them to opponents that they had no business losing to, like the Packers losing to the Cardinals. The Bears even lost to the Giants, and the Bears are fighting for that division out there in the north of the NFC. But the Panthers, losing to the Bucs and dropping down to a point where they're in big trouble. The Colts losing to the Jaguars, who only scored 6 points. Meanwhile, the Colts had no points. I mean, Justin, what shocked me was just some of these teams that could have significantly impacted their chances of being in the hunt for those wild card berths. They go and lose games to opponents that they shouldn't lose to. It just makes you think, what are we going to get when we get to the playoffs? Because I'm starting to think that you could maybe take the money, run to Vegas or now your local betting center, and put the money on the favorites, because it seems like some of these mid-level teams just don't have what it takes.
No, definitely the fight for both basically 6 seeds in the AFC and the NFC. It's getting crazy. I started this off talking about this was one of those weeks where you just had a bunch of results that are just really hard to explain and why people love the NFL, because week in, week out, especially when you're either trying to pick games or pick with the lines, sometimes you feel like you don't know what team is going to show up. And Eric, a team that's consistently not showed up is the Panthers that you touched on there. They lost again this week at Tampa. Cam throws 4 interceptions. The Panthers have dropped 4 straight. And at the end of that game, Cam couldn't even throw the Hail Mary, which has brought up concerns about his shoulder. Remember, this was a team that was just sitting there looking like they were in the driver's seat at 6-2 for a playoff spot, maybe even the challenge for that division. Now they're in a mess of traffic trying to get into the playoffs. So do you have any confidence in this team that they can turn it around? Or do you think Cam does have some kind of shoulder injury that's affecting him and affecting this team?
I think Cam has a shoulder injury, and I think he also has a mental injury. I mean, we've talked about it in the fact that once they made that Super Bowl run and it didn't work out, and then you had the shenanigans that happened in the interviews and stuff after that, I feel like, to me, and this is just, my opinion, but I feel like, to me, Cam Newton has never been the same quarterback since that Super Bowl run. I just feel like whether it's something in between his ears or something on the field physically, he just doesn't perform the way that he did in that season a couple seasons ago. I just don't have confidence that the Panthers are going to make any difference in this year's playoffs. I really don't.
I think he's got a shoulder injury, and I think they're trying to hide it. I think this will be one of those stories that comes out after the year that it's more significant than we thought or than they let on, and that's affecting him. He just doesn't look good. Compared to what he looked at earlier in the year, that he was actually a much more accurate quarterback. North Turner was getting all this praise for the work he had put in. They have regressed. Ever since that Thursday night, they went into Pittsburgh and they got whipped. And look, their defense has played horrible since then as well. They are giving up 30 points with regularity, and they've got a Browns team coming in after they got smoked by the Texans. You know that they're not going to be too happy with the way that they played and the way that Baker himself played. He didn't look very good as well with 3 first-half interceptions. And Eric, that kind of leads into the next story where I think you have another player, another premier quarterback in this league where in the offseason it'll come out, whether that's true or not, that he was playing with a more significant injury than the team or he himself led on, and that's Aaron Rodgers with the Green Bay Packers. They lost maybe the most puzzling game of Week 13 as they lost to Arizona and basically ended their chances to make the playoffs. Arizona, you talk about them, a West Coast team, a warm weather team, a team that basically plays in a retractable dome, coming across the country to play in Green Bay, in the snow, in the cold, in the wind, and they find a way to beat the Packers, who were in desperation mode to try to make the playoffs. After the game, Green Bay fires head coach Mike McCarthy. So, Eric, this is not going well all year for this team. You talk about a team that has massively not living up to the hype and the expectation. And what's funny is, Eric, we talked about this in their preview about the hype around Aaron Rodgers and the fact that this team really just hasn't had a lot of success, especially in the playoffs. And now they're even struggling regular season-wise. Rodgers can't seem to stay healthy and on the field for a whole year. Now you've got this fractured relationship with McCarthy. Green Bay decides to make the move to fire him. But when you look at the success Mike McCarthy has had while being a head coach in Green Bay, was this the right time for them to make this move?
That's a tough one. I mean, was it the right time? I don't think so. I think generally when you're a head coach that gets fired in the middle of the season, that speaks to major organizational differences, whether it be through some of the staff there or through the GM and ownership. Clearly, there's also a rift in this team between Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy. It's been kind of talked about in the media. We don't know how bad it really is, but to get fired during the middle of a season, to me, is kind of an insult, and I don't think Mike McCarthy deserved that. The team is clearly out of the playoff hunt now at this point. I don't think there was any reason that he couldn't be given the chance to just at least coach the final games remaining on the schedule and then just release him on Black Monday like, 6 or 7 other head coaches always get at the end of the year. To me, that's more respectful of a guy that's giving you over a decade of service to your team as a head coach, delivered a Super Bowl, giving you a lot of success. But I think Aaron Rodgers' voice is, looming large here, and he's clearly unhappy. But at the same time, I think Aaron Rodgers has to look at himself, because I know we talked about the hype. I know we talked about how it seems like he's a media darling. It seems like he has some of these games and he does some amazing things where people are like, wow, Aaron Rodgers, how is he not the greatest of all time? And it's like, look, he's not the greatest of all time because it just doesn't become delivered in the team's record and in their playoff success and ultimately with Super Bowl rings. So when you have a star quarterback, though, that's not going anywhere, and then you have another lost season where they're not going to the playoffs, they're definitely not going to win a Super Bowl as a result of that, it's time to move on from the head coach. But I just think that doing it in the middle of the season like this is a disrespect to any head coach, and in this case, Mike McCarthy didn't deserve that.
I think this was all about Aaron Rodgers. And I think it was all about showing them that they want to do what is right by him. And they understood the fact that he and McCarthy did not really have a relationship. And I really didn't think that way. I thought the way that you did, like this was disrespectful and this is not something that should be done, until I heard Jeff Saturday's comments on ESPN earlier this week, where he talked about even when he was there a few years ago, that when the play call would come in, Rodgers would roll his eyes, he would shrug his shoulders, that there was already basically a sign of disrespect and a sign of distrust and a sign that they just didn't believe in McCarthy. And this year it's even evolved into hearing about Rodgers changing the plays in the huddle that McCarthy's sending in. Now they're only 4-7-1. So you start to wonder, maybe Aaron Rodgers needs to take his hands off this offense as well. And they need to just bring someone in to sort of revamp things, that maybe neither one of them were figuring out a way to make things work. But it just felt like this was going downhill. This team had just quit on McCarthy. I expect Rodgers to come out this Sunday versus Atlanta, and I think he's going to play one of his best games of the year, in spite of the fact that they got rid of McCarthy, because he wants to prove he's not the guy at fault. That if they had someone in there that was running offenses that were more up to speed with what's happening today, not, as someone quoted, using things that they had run 10 years ago and not really changing things, I think Rodgers wants to prove that he's not to blame, that it should be on McCarthy's shoulders of why this team has struggled. But that's the thing, Eric. You start to wonder, okay, how really good is Aaron Rodgers? Again, you talked about it. He's the media darling. Everybody wants to throw him into GOAT conversations. But if you started right now today looking at quarterbacks that you could have for the next 2 years, where would Rodgers be? Because it feels like he would be behind a guy like Mahomes, behind Breeze. You look at the way Phillip Rivers has even played, maybe putting his best season together. Rodgers is maybe a fringe top 5 guy at this point, is what I see. I don't know how then you can extrapolate that out to say, oh, this guy's the greatest of all time, when he's barely top 5 and he's only 35 years old. We've seen that sort of can be the prime of these guys' career, where they still have the ability to make all the throws, but they've seen enough defenses where it's hard to trick them. So they're kind of in that perfect sweet spot. And we've seen the struggles that Rodgers has had, where you see a guy like Patrick Mahomes come in his almost basically his rookie year. He only played one game his rookie year, so his first year starting, and he's lit the league up. Jared Goff doing the same things with McVay in his third year. So to me, Eric, that's where the questions come in. Is it feels like Rodgers gets hyped up, and maybe the hype is now overextended from even Rodgers' ability.
Yeah, for me, I know you're going to close out the segment, but for me, I'm just telling you, he's not top 5 for me. If I was a GM and I was starting a team, it just, the hypothetical that you brought up, there's 5 guys I would pick over Aaron Rodgers. I don't want to say easily, but I would say there are 5 guys I would pick before Aaron Rodgers.
Well, that'll do it here for segment 1. We went all NFL talk here in segment 1. A lot to cover both on the field and off the field. When we come back, we're going to jump back into some more football. We've got to talk about what's going on with college football. What in the world was Georgia thinking going for it on that 4th down play? We'll get Eric's reaction to that. Did the committee get the 4 teams right that'll play for the College Football National Championship? We'll talk about the Heisman Trophy. Who should win it this coming Saturday night? And then we'll talk about the XFL. Can they finally figure out a way to get this right? We'll have that and more when we come back. It's Talkworthy time here on episode 227, and let's jump right into college football. But before we get to the 4 teams that the committee put in that will play for the College Football National Championship, let's talk about on-the-field action from this past weekend, as Georgia looked like they were going to jump right into the mix of these 4 teams, as they had Alabama on the ropes, but they couldn't close them out. This game seemed to come down to a fake punt on 4th and 11, which failed, gave Alabama great field position. They went down and got the go-ahead touchdown. Eric, we've talked about aggressiveness in the NFL a lot this year. Now it's bled over into college football. Did you like the move at that point, like the aggressive move, going for the win, knowing that they had to win this game to get into the playoffs? Or should they have just punted the ball, let their defense try to play it out, and at least go to overtime to give them the best chance to win?
I know that you're in it to win it at that point. You're Georgia against Alabama. A win against Alabama would completely change the landscape of college football this year. But Alabama had Hurts in the game. They've kind of battled back. Georgia controlled a lot of that game for a good portion of the 3 quarters that they led. And, look, it's a tough situation as a coach. I understand that. But I just think that the risk was really